I was really looking forward to seeing Napoleon. I've always really liked history. He's easily one of the most interesting parts of it. And it's just been nice to see historical and more niche movies start to get a lot of attention. And I thought this would just be another breath of fresh air for the movie industry. Plus, I've never seen a movie with Joaquin Phoenix that I haven't liked so far.
He will not let me down. He never has.
But unfortunately, this movie is just a huge letdown for no matter who you are, I think. Historical movies usually pick a side to lean towards, whether it's going to try to appeal to an audience that isn't really familiar with history or the people involved, or if it's going to lean to people that already know the basics and do like a deep character study on who it's talking about. And I'm not saying I wrote the book on this guy, that I went through and read every letter he ever sent or anything, but I'm relatively well informed on French history, and Napoleon's one of the most interesting historical figures there is, so I've read a lot about him, you know? And I went to see this movie with two people, one who had never really learned much about Napoleon, and one that had, like me. And the one who was unfamiliar pretty much had no idea what was going on in the movie up until about the halfway point when Napoleon crowns himself as the emperor. And the other one was as frustrated as I was with how out of context the events of the movie are. And I don't mean that in a way of, I don't like how it presented him in an overtly negative or positive light. He was an incredibly complex individual, and I really would have been happy with either spin on it, however they choose to look at it. But this movie feels like it has no purpose, no frame, and no overarching theme at all. They could have gone any direction with this, and instead they took it no direction. Why not show some meaning in the way Napoleon carried the French Revolution on his back to overthrow the monarchy, and then by the time he's finally exiled, he's replaced with King Louis's brother, Why not have a great character arc, or explore the fact that he allowed his greed and ambition to erase all the progress he spent his whole life fighting for? He overthrew the monarch to give power to the people, and as he continued to seize more power for himself, crowning himself emperor, he brought back the institutions he wanted to destroy in the first place. I mean, this movie feels like a disjointed highlight reel of extremely famous events, the significance of which are completely lost on anyone that isn't already informed of them, and for those that are, the events aren't shown with enough depth to be satisfying. And to be honest, with the way Napoleon is written in this movie, you wouldn't think he was one of the most influential people of all time, or the most successful military leader in history. This movie makes it seem like he is constantly in over his head and being prompted by other people to take more power over and over again. It just does such a bad job of showing his own ambition, and even in the battle shown, it doesn't let you know why what he's doing is so impressive. The first battle of the movie, if I didn't already know what was going on just from learning about the French Revolution, I would have not been able to follow it. They don't really capture why it's such a big deal that he took that fort, or show you the tactics he used and why they were so clever. You don't get to see how he used the grape shot. And they skip even better battles that they could have put in that battle's place. I mean, the only time you really get to see him do some impressive strategizing is for like a minute during the Battle of Waterloo and for the trap he set on the lake. I will say, the battles in this movie are absolutely beautiful. The cinematography is one of the few things this movie really has going for it. And it was also incredible to see Napoleon upgrade his outfit like a video game character as he completed his side quest. But I'm just saying, if you only had time for one fight in his early career, because, you have to encapsulate everything in this movie, why would you pick this one over his defense of Paris from the Royalist army, attempting to take control back from the people? He was incredibly outnumbered and used fantastic positioning to save the revolution almost single-handedly with barely any losses. And they really don't show at all that he is a national hero or how absolutely loved he is by the French people. You never really get to see his impact. And by not explaining this properly, the whole Egypt part of the movie doesn't make much sense. The reason he went to Egypt was in part because of his own ambition. He just wanted to conquer things and he couldn't attack England. But they don't really show the fact that the French leaders want him gone because he is a threat, because the people love him so much they're scared he's going to take power. They want to get rid of Napoleon. They also don't show that Napoleon was single-handedly carrying the French military to the point where the other countries waited until he left and went to Egypt to start attacking France. And when he returns from Egypt, he takes over, yes, because of ambition, but also because France is crumbling without him. In the movie, you have no idea what's happening. He comes back to France and talks mad shit to the French leaders, but the movie gives you no context of it, so it seems like he's just talking out of his ass. You know, it makes no sense within the movie that he's able to come back after a big loss and just flip the situation during a hearing about his own failure. And they don't give enough significance to the fact that he really just abandoned his army in Egypt to die. You know, they give him the emotional excuse, basically, of his wife cheating on him, which makes it seem like he didn't return because he lost. Like, his army was doomed, his fleet was burned, and he just left. He left them all to die. And ironically, even though it makes no sense in the movie, this scene where he's talking to the French leaders when he returns from Egypt is pretty much the only time Phoenix is allowed to show that he could be a really good fit for this role if only he was allowed to express any of the charisma and presence Napoleon should carry. I mean, when he shushed that guy across the table and then just started roasting him after he was under pressure, I mean, that was just hilarious. That was one of my favorite moments of the movie. But they don't even really show any of the interesting things about his excursion to Egypt. It's like they put that in the movie just to have him shoot at the pyramid, which is something that never even happens in real life. You know, they just ignored that he went there, beat an army of famous cavalry while outnumbered 2-1 with barely any losses, using incredible new tactics made up on the spot. And you might notice a pattern of him doing that, but you would never know it from the movie. You know, him going to Egypt also allowed the Rosetta Stone to be discovered and enabled hieroglyphs to be translated for the first time. And it's not even just the fact they're not doing justice to how incredible he was at battle. I mean, he fought like 90 battles and he won 80-something of them, with tons of them being against overwhelming odds. I mean, those are unparalleled numbers in history.
I'm the GOAT.
The GOAT?
I'm the greatest of all time.
Really?
Yeah, undisputed.
But because they don't show that this guy is unstoppable, when he actually loses, you don't really understand how big of a deal it is. You know, like that March on Moscow part, that is like the greatest defeat he ever suffered. And it's because he got outsmarted by the Russians. I mean, that was a genius play to literally just abandon the city and screw him over by having to march back in the winter. That was the worst defeat he ever suffered. But you never see anything about him reflecting on his overambition or the fact that he undid a lot of work in France, or that he's proud of what he did. Like, there's just no direction in this movie. It's just a bunch of random scenes thrown together that don't amount to anything. And the worst part of all of it is that Napoleon's return to France after he gets exiled should be the most impactful scene of the movie. This should be living in your head rent-free for a week. You know, after being exiled to an island, he raises a new army from its inhabitants that's only about 700 men. That's it.
You know, if I hadn't resigned in disgrace, I might never have explored the private sector. It's like, why didn't I resign in disgrace 12 years ago?
He comes back to France, and the king sends 2 massive armies to crush him. And when they arrive, Napoleon convinces both of them to abandon the king and join him again. That is insane. That is so insane that it sounds like it's made up. This should be the climax of the movie, where after resigning in disgrace, he comes back and finds that the people of France still love and appreciate everything he's done, so much so that they are willing to support this far-fetched campaign where he's outnumbered 5-1. I mean, to be fair, Napoleon defeated odds like this pretty consistently, so maybe it wasn't so far-fetched. But regardless, it doesn't make sense at all in the movie. First off, the movie has not shown the French people love him at all. His impact on the country is completely ignored outside of a few random wars. He had pretty much doubled the size of France at one point, overhauled the education system, and pulled France out of financial ruin with all his new policies, which is something you guys could help do for this channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. Thanks. But anyway, he does all this for France, and none of it's ever mentioned. If you only knew what this movie has shown you up to this point, it makes no sense why the soldiers would support him. Most of what we've seen from Napoleon in this movie have just been failures. He abandoned his men in Egypt, and right before this, he foolishly led his entire army to their deaths marching on Russia in the winter. Why would anybody like him in this context? Apart from not making sense, this would be the time for an inspiring speech or to show the natural charisma he had. Instead, all we get is a timid Napoleon pointing at his chest and saying, "You remember me?" And suddenly everyone's on his side. It is just utterly ridiculous. And the most frustrating part of the whole movie is the insane amount of focus that is on his marriage. It's repetitive, it's inconsistent, and it lacks purpose altogether. I understand that his marriage is a big part of his life, but the amount of scenes wasted here discussing the same exact things over and over is just absurd. And if I'm misremembering something here, forgive me, I only saw this movie once in theaters and I don't plan on watching it again. But if I remember right, there's a scene where a guy tells Napoleon he needs an heir and he should leave his wife if they can't have a baby. Then there's a scene where Napoleon's at dinner telling his wife he needs her to get pregnant. Then there's a scene where he tells her that he's going on a mission, and if she isn't pregnant by the time he gets back, he's gonna divorce her. Then there's a scene where he does the deed with another woman to see if he's the problem. Then there's a scene when he gets back, and his wife tells him she knows that he's gonna leave her. Then there's the official divorce ceremony scene where they actually get divorced. And then there are more scenes about her moving out and how he still loves her and all the yada. It's so redundant, and it takes up so much time that could have been used for...
Oh, I don't know, maybe Lord Voldemort.
But no, for real, this guy fought 7 coalition wars, in which almost all of them, it was every powerful country in Europe against just France, and he won 5 times in a row. And you don't want to include any of that in the movie?
Tell you what I think. It doesn't matter what you think.
Not only do they basically just repeat scenes that don't even need to be a major plot point, but the dialogue is just so bad at times that it's hard to watch. I mean, an actual line he has in this movie is he's talking to someone and he's like, "You think you're better than me just because you have a bunch of boats?" Who wrote this? I mean, and that's not the worst case even. There's scenes where he's just growling at his wife because he wants affection. Like, it's insane. And another nitpick I have is they establish pretty early on that Josephine has kids already when he meets her, and they just completely disappear from the movie until one scene at the very end, like years later. Because it's not used to provide any meaningful development, half the runtime being dedicated to this marriage just feels like a waste of time. And overall, I mean, this movie would have worked better as a set of 3 movies. You know, one about the French Revolution and his rise to power, the second one about his reign and the coalition wars, and the third one about his downfall and Waterloo and all that. But I understand why they didn't try that, because I doubt the demand is there for a historical Napoleon trilogy. But even with having to cram everything in this one movie, they really dropped the ball pretty hard. You know, it's still not the worst thing in the world, but I can't even really give it more than like a 6.5 out of 10. I mean, his real life is just twice as interesting as how it's portrayed in this movie. You wouldn't even think he's worth making a movie about if you just knew what you know about him from this movie. So I suggest you skip this one and instead search up Napoleon on YouTube and have your freaking mind blown by how insane this guy's life was. But I'm done ranting. That's going to do it for this one. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of HeadCannon.